The morning light filtered through the gauze curtains of Grandma Rose's bedroom, casting everything in a golden hue that made her look peaceful for the first time in months. I sat beside her bed, holding her papery hand while David paced near the window, checking his phone every few minutes. Even in those final moments, he couldn't be fully present. "Sarah, honey," Grandma Rose whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle hum of the oxygen machine. "Come closer." I leaned in, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and old books that always surrounded her. Her eyes, still sharp despite her failing body, fixed on mine with an intensity that made my heart skip. "Promise me something," she said, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. "Promise me you'll remember who you are, no matter what happens next." I nodded, tears blurring my vision. "I promise, Grandma." She smiled then, that same mischievous smile I'd loved since childhood. "Good. Because I have a feeling you're going to need that reminder very soon." Those were her last coherent words. She passed away 3 hours later, with me still holding her hand and David finally putting his phone away to stand awkwardly at the foot of the bed. Grandma Rose had been the cornerstone of my life for as long as I could remember. When my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, she didn't hesitate to take me in. Her sprawling Victorian house became my sanctuary, filled with the aroma of her famous chocolate chip cookies and the sound of her humming old jazz standards while she tended her garden. She was unconventional in every way that mattered. While other grandmothers knitted and watched soap operas, Rose taught me to change a tire, balance a checkbook, and never accept less than I deserved from anyone, especially men. She'd been widowed young and had built her own successful antique business from nothing, traveling the world to source unique pieces for her shop. "Independence is the only inheritance that truly matters," she used to tell me while we worked side by side in her garden. "Money can be lost, houses can burn down, but if you know your own worth, no one can ever take that away from you." I carried those lessons with me through college, through my early career as a social worker, and even into my marriage to David. Though I was beginning to wonder if I'd forgotten them somewhere along the way. David Hamilton was everything I thought I wanted when we met 5 years ago at a charity gala. Tall, handsome, successful in real estate, with a smile that could charm anyone. He swept me off my feet with expensive dinners and weekend getaways, and when he proposed after 8 months of dating, I said yes, without hesitation. Grandma Rose had been polite but reserved when I brought David home to meet her. After he left that first visit, she made us tea and sat across from me at her kitchen table, studying my face. "He's very charming," she said carefully. "But," I prompted, knowing there was more. "But charm is like perfume, dear. A little goes a long way, and too much can be overwhelming." She paused, choosing her words. "Just make sure he loves you for who you are, not who he thinks you could become." I brushed off her concerns then, attributing them to overprotectiveness. David seemed genuinely interested in my work, supportive of my goals, and he made me laugh. What more could I want? But as the months turned into years, I began to see what Grandma Rose had noticed that first day. David's charm was often a performance, his support conditional on my choices aligning with his vision of our future. When I mentioned wanting to go back to school for my master's degree, he suggested I wait until we had children. When I talked about traveling to volunteer with disaster relief organizations, he reminded me of our mortgage and his business expenses. Gradually, I found myself becoming smaller, quieter, more accommodating. I told myself it was compromise, that this was how marriages worked. But the woman who had once planned to change the world was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone whose primary concerns were whether David would be home for dinner and if his shirts were properly pressed for his client meetings. Grandma Rose never said, "I told you so," but I caught her watching me sometimes with sad, knowing eyes that made my chest ache with recognition of what I'd lost. The funeral was held on a gray October morning at St. Mary's, the same church where Grandma Rose had married my grandfather 60 years earlier. The pews were packed with people whose lives she'd touched, former employees from her antique shop, neighbors she'd helped through difficult times, young women she'd mentored over the years. I was overwhelmed by the number of people who came forward to share stories of her kindness, her wisdom, her fierce loyalty to those she loved. David played the part of the grieving son-in-law perfectly, accepting condolences with just the right amount of solemn dignity. But I noticed how his attention kept drifting to the crowd, mentally networking even at a funeral. When Mrs. Chen from the antique shop pulled me aside to tell me how proud Grandma Rose had been of my volunteer work I'd given up years ago at David's insistence, I saw him check his watch impatiently. After the service, we gathered at Grandma Rose's house for the traditional meal. The Victorian mansion that had always felt warm and welcoming now seemed hollow and strange without her presence. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, accepting hugs and sharing memories while David glad-handed his way through conversations with anyone who looked prosperous. It wasn't until most of the guests had left that Mr. Patterson, Grandma Rose's longtime attorney, approached me with a manila envelope. "Sarah, dear," he said, his weathered face kind but serious. "Rose asked me to give you this today. She wanted you to read it before the formal reading of the will tomorrow." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope and unfolded the handwritten letter inside. Grandma Rose's familiar script danced across the page. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then I'm finally at peace, and you're probably feeling lost and alone. Don't be. Everything I've done has been to ensure you remember who you truly are. I've watched you shrink yourself over these past few years, trying to fit into a life that doesn't suit you. I've bitten my tongue because I know you needed to discover this for yourself, but I won't leave this world without giving you the tools you need to reclaim your power. Tomorrow you'll learn the details of my will. Please know that every decision I've made has been with your happiness and independence in mind. I love you more than all the stars in the sky, and I believe in the strong, capable woman you were always meant to be. Remember your promise to me. All my love, Grandma Rose P.S. Don't let anyone convince you to make decisions quickly. Real wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in choices." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my purse, my mind racing. David appeared at my elbow, smelling of whiskey and aftershave. "What was that about?" he asked, trying to read over my shoulder. "Just some personal words from Grandma Rose," I said, stepping away from him. "Mr. Patterson wants us at his office tomorrow at 10 for the will reading." David's eyes lit up with poorly concealed excitement. "I'll clear my schedule." That night, as I lay in bed listening to David's contented snoring, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Grandma Rose had been comfortable but not ostentatiously wealthy. She owned her house outright, had some investments, and the antique business had done well over the years. I'd always assumed she'd leave everything to me, her only family, and I'd been prepared to use any inheritance to honor her memory, and perhaps find my way back to the woman I used to be. But something in her letter suggested there was more to the story than I knew. Mr. Patterson's office was a study in old-world elegance, with mahogany bookshelves, Persian rugs, and the musty smell of aged leather and important documents. David and I sat in matching chairs across from the attorney's imposing desk, while he arranged papers with methodical precision. "Before we begin," Mr. Patterson said, removing his wire-rimmed glasses to clean them, "I want to explain that Rose spent considerable time crafting these arrangements. Every provision was carefully considered and has been reviewed multiple times to ensure it reflects her exact wishes." He put his glasses back on and opened a thick folder. "Rose's estate is valued at approximately $4.7 million. I gasped. David's hand found mine and squeezed, but I noticed his palm was damp with excitement. $4.7 million? I whispered. "How is that possible?" Mr. Patterson smiled. "Your grandmother was shrewder than most people realized. Her antique business was quite successful, but more importantly, she made some very wise investments over the years. She also inherited a substantial sum from a great-aunt many years ago, which she never touched but allowed to grow." I was reeling. Grandma Rose had lived modestly, driving the same car for 15 years and mending clothes rather than buying new ones. I'd had no idea she was sitting on such wealth. "Now," Mr. Patterson continued, "as to the distribution of the estate." He cleared his throat and began reading from the official document. "To my beloved granddaughter, Sarah Hamilton, I leave my house at 1247 Maple Street, along with all its contents, my personal effects, and the sum of $50,000 to be used as she sees fit." $50,000. out of nearly $5 million. I felt David's hand tighten on mine, his confusion palpable. The remainder of my estate, Mr. Patterson continued, including all investment accounts, the antique business, and associated assets totaling approximately $4.6 million, I leave to David Hamilton, my granddaughter's husband. The silence in the room was deafening. David's mouth fell open, then closed, then opened again like a fish out of water. I stared at Mr. Patterson in complete shock. "There must be some mistake," I said faintly. "There is no mistake," Mr. Patterson replied gently. "However, there are conditions attached to Mr. Hamilton's inheritance." "Conditions?" David found his voice, though it came out as a croak. "Yes, the inheritance is contingent upon certain requirements being met." Mr. Patterson adjusted his glasses and continued reading. "First, David Hamilton must remain married to Sarah Hamilton for a period of no less than 10 years from the date of this will's execution. Second, he must provide documentation proving that Sarah Hamilton has returned to school to complete her master's degree in social work within 2 years of my death. Third, he must demonstrate that Sarah Hamilton has resumed her volunteer work with disaster relief organizations, with his full financial and emotional support." David's face was cycling through colors like a traffic light red with excitement, pale with shock, and now a sickly green as the implications sank in. "Furthermore, Mr. Patterson continued, his voice carrying a hint of satisfaction, should David Hamilton divorce Sarah Hamilton before the 10-year period is complete, or should he fail to support her educational and professional goals as outlined, the entire inheritance will be immediately transferred to Sarah Hamilton, along with a penalty sum of $1 million from any remaining assets in David Hamilton's name." The room spun around me. Grandma Rose had trapped David in our marriage with a golden chain, but she'd also given me the keys to my own cage. I thought of her last words about remembering who I was, and suddenly I understood. "There's more," Mr. Patterson said, and I saw David grip the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles went white. "Sarah Hamilton has the right to nullify her husband's inheritance at any time by filing for divorce herself. In such a case, she would inherit the full estate immediately. However, Rose wanted to include a personal note here." He pulled out another piece of paper in Grandma Rose's handwriting and began to read. "Sarah, I'm not trying to buy your happiness or force you to stay in a marriage that doesn't serve you. I'm simply ensuring that if you choose to stay, it will be because David has become the partner you deserve, not because you feel trapped by circumstances. If he truly loves you, he'll prove it through his actions. If he doesn't, you'll have the means to start over on your own terms. The choice, my dear one, is entirely yours." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. David stared straight ahead, his jaw working as if he were chewing something bitter. Finally, he turned to look at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Fear. "Sarah," he said carefully, "this is unexpected." I almost laughed at the understatement. That's one word for it. We drove home in complete silence. David gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him from flying apart, while I stared out the window and tried to process what had just happened. Grandma Rose had given David everything he thought he wanted, but she'd made sure he could only keep it by giving me everything I needed. The next few days passed in a surreal haze. David was attentive in a way he hadn't been in years, bringing me coffee in bed and asking about my day with newfound interest. But I could see the calculation behind his every gesture, the way he was weighing the cost of his charm against the value of $4.6 million. On the third night after the will reading, as we sat across from each other at dinner, David finally broke. "We need to talk about this situation," he said, setting down his fork with deliberate care. "What situation?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "The will, the conditions, what we're going to do about them." I took a sip of wine and studied my husband's face. "What do you think we should do?" "Look, Sarah, I know things haven't been perfect between us lately. We've grown apart, gotten comfortable, maybe taken each other for granted. But this could be a fresh start for us. We could travel, you could go back to school like you always wanted, I could support your volunteer work. We could be happy." "Could we?" I asked quietly. "Or would you be happy because you're rich? and I'd be expected to be grateful for the privilege of being married to you. David flinched. That's not fair. Isn't it? I set down my own fork and leaned back in my chair. David, when was the last time you asked me what I wanted without it being connected to money or inheritance or what would make your life easier? He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. We both knew the answer. I've been thinking, I continued, about what Grandma Rose said in her letter, about remembering who I am. Do you know who I used to be, David, before I became your wife? Of course I do, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I used to work disaster sites, helping families rebuild their lives after hurricanes and floods. I worked 18-hour days because I believed I was making a difference. I had plans to get my master's degree, to maybe run my own relief organization someday. I traveled to places you can't even pronounce because there were people there who needed help. David shifted uncomfortably. You can do all those things again. The inheritance makes it possible. The inheritance makes it financially possible, I corrected. But what about you, David? What about the man who convinced me that my dreams were impractical? Who made me feel selfish for wanting to help strangers instead of focusing on our life together? That man doesn't disappear just because there's money involved now. We stared at each other across the table, the weight of 5 years of accumulated resentment settling between us like dust. I can change, David said finally, and for the first time I heard genuine desperation in his voice. People change, Sarah. I know I haven't been the husband you deserved, but I can be better. We can be better. I wanted to believe him. Part of me, the part that remembered falling in love with his smile and his confidence, wanted to give him the chance to prove himself. But another part, the part that sounded suspiciously like Grandma Rose, wondered if he was motivated by love or by the prospect of losing millions of dollars. Maybe you can change, I said slowly, but I need to figure out if I want to be here to see it. That night, I called in sick to work and drove to Grandma Rose's house. Mr. Patterson had given me the keys, and I needed to be alone in the place that had always felt most like home. The house seemed to echo with memories as I walked through the familiar rooms. In the kitchen, I could almost see Grandma Rose at the stove, humming while she cooked. In the living room, I remembered countless evenings spent reading together, her in her favorite armchair, and me curled up on the window seat. I climbed the stairs to her bedroom and sat on the edge of her bed, running my hands over the handmade quilt she'd treasured. That's when I noticed the small wooden box on her nightstand, one I'd somehow missed during the funeral preparations. Inside the box was a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. My heart nearly stopped when I saw they were all addressed to me, in Grandma Rose's handwriting, with dates spanning the last 5 years. The top envelope was marked, "To be opened if Sarah chooses herself." With trembling fingers, I untied the ribbon and opened the first letter, dated just 2 months after my wedding. My dearest Sarah, today you called to tell me about your decision to postpone graduate school. You tried to sound happy about it, but I could hear the disappointment in your voice. I wanted to reach through the phone and shake some sense into both you and that husband of yours, but I know this is a lesson you need to learn in your own time. I'm writing this because I have a feeling there will come a day when you need to remember that your dreams matter, that your voice matters, that you matter, independent of anyone else's approval or disapproval. I love you too much to watch you disappear, even if it means being patient while you find your way back to yourself. I opened letter after letter, each one documenting moments when Grandma Rose had watched me compromise pieces of myself for the sake of my marriage. She'd witnessed every small surrender, every dream deferred, every time I'd chosen peace over authenticity. The last letter was dated just a week before her death. My darling girl, by the time you read this, you'll know about the will and the choice I've given you. I hope you understand that I'm not trying to manipulate your marriage or your life. I'm simply ensuring that whatever you choose from a position of strength, not desperation. David is not a bad man, but he's a weak one. He's the type who will rise to meet expectations when they're high and sink to meet them when they're low. The question is whether you want to spend your life being his motivation to be better, or whether you want to be with someone who is already worthy of you. You have your grandfather's courage and your mother's compassion, and more intelligence than the lot of us combined. Whatever you decide, I know it will be the right choice, because it will be your choice. Remember, real wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in choices. I love you forever, Grandma Rose. I sat in the gathering darkness of her bedroom and cried for her, for the woman I'd been, for the time I'd lost, and for the terrifying freedom I now faced. When I got home that evening, David was waiting for me in the living room with a bouquet of roses and an expression of barely contained anxiety. "Where have you been?" he asked, standing as I entered the room. I was worried. "I went to Grandma Rose's house to think." He held out the flowers. "These are for you. I know this has been a difficult week." I accepted the roses but didn't go to put them in water. Instead, I sat down across from him, still holding the bouquet. "David, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." "Of course." "If there was no inheritance, if Grandma Rose had left everything to charity and we were exactly where we were a week ago, would you be standing here with flowers, talking about fresh starts and supporting my dreams?" The question hung in the air like smoke. David's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. Sarah, that's not fair. The inheritance changes things, yes, but it changes them for the better. It gives us opportunities we didn't have before." "That's not what I asked." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized as his tell when he was trying to figure out what I wanted to hear. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Maybe not immediately. Maybe it would have taken me longer to realize what I was losing. But I would have gotten there eventually." "Would you?" "Yes," he said, but we both heard the uncertainty in his voice. I set the roses down on the coffee table between us. "I've made a decision." David went very still. "Sarah, I'm going to give you the chance to prove that you mean what you say." Relief flooded his features. "Thank you. You won't regret this, I promise." "I'm not finished." I stood up and walked to the window, needing to put some distance between us for what I was about to say. "I'm going to file the paperwork to start my master's program next week. I'm also going to contact the Red Cross about resuming my volunteer work. If you support me in those things, really support me, not just tolerate them, then we'll stay married and you'll get your inheritance." "That's wonderful," David said, and I could hear him smiling. "I'm behind you 100%. But," I continued, turning back to face him, "the first time you make me feel guilty for being away at school, or for missing dinner because I'm at a disaster site, or for putting my education and my calling ahead of your convenience, I'm filing for divorce. The first time you try to make me smaller so you can feel bigger, it's over." The smile faded from David's voice. "Sarah, that's a little extreme." "Is it? Is it extreme to expect my husband to actually want me to be happy? To be proud of my accomplishments instead of threatened by them?" I moved closer, looking directly into his eyes. "Because here's what I've realized, David. I'd rather be alone with $4.6 million than trapped in a marriage with someone who sees my dreams as competition." David swallowed hard. "I understand." "Do you? Because this isn't about the money for me. This is about whether the man I married is capable of loving the woman I actually am, not the diminished version of myself I became to keep the peace." "I can do this," David said, and for the first time in years, I heard something that might have been sincerity in his voice. "I want to do this. Then prove it." The next few months were unlike anything in our marriage. David, faced with the very real possibility of losing everything, threw himself into the role of supportive husband with the same intensity he'd once reserved for closing real estate deals. He drove me to campus for my first day of graduate classes and picked me up afterward, asking about my professors and assignments with what seemed like genuine interest. When the Red Cross called with my first assignment, a flood response in Louisiana, he helped me pack and drove me to the airport without a single complaint. But I watched him carefully, looking for cracks in the facade, and I found them. I saw the way his jaw tightened when I mentioned staying an extra day at a disaster site because the need was greater than expected. I caught him checking his phone instead of listening when I talked about my thesis project. I noticed how he steered conversations away from my work when we were with his friends, redirecting the focus to his own business successes. He was trying, but it was an effort for him. Being married to an independent, accomplished woman was work he had to consciously do, not something that came naturally. And I began to realize that I was tired of being someone's homework assignment. The breaking point came 6 months after the will reading. I'd been accepted into a summer program that would take me to Guatemala for 3 weeks to work on sustainable rebuilding practices. It was an incredible opportunity that could shape my entire career trajectory. 3 weeks? David said when I told him over dinner. Sarah, that's a long time. We have the Masons' anniversary party that second weekend, and my mother is expecting us for Sunday dinner while you're gone. You can go to the party alone, and I'm sure your mother will understand. But what about us? What about our marriage? We're supposed to be working on things together. There it was, the same old song with slightly different lyrics. My opportunities were still inconveniences to be managed rather than achievements to be celebrated. David, I said carefully, this program is important to me. It could open doors for my entire future career. I understand that, but couldn't you find something closer to home? Something that doesn't require you to be gone for weeks at a time? And in that moment, I heard Grandma Rose's voice as clearly as if she were sitting beside me. Real wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in choices. I had a choice. I could keep trying to make David into the man I needed him to be, or I could choose myself. I'm going to Guatemala, I said quietly. Sarah. And when I get back, I'm filing for divorce. The color drained from David's face. What? Why? I've been supportive. I've done everything you asked. You've performed being supportive, I corrected. There's a difference. You've white-knuckled your way through 6 months of pretending my dreams don't inconvenience you, and I can see how hard it is for you. How much you resent having to consider my goals equal to your own. That's not true. David, look me in the eye and tell me you're genuinely excited about my Guatemala opportunity. Tell me you're proud that your wife was selected for this program out of hundreds of applicants. He opened his mouth, then closed it. We both knew he couldn't say those words honestly. I thought so, I said sadly. You're trying to love the woman I am, but you fell in love with the woman I was becoming for you. Those aren't the same person, and I can't keep shrinking myself to fit into the space you're comfortable with. But the money? We'll be fine, I finished. I'll be fine. For the first time in years, I'm choosing what's best for me instead of what's easiest for everyone else. David stared at me across the table, and I saw the exact moment when he realized I was serious, that I was willing to give up being married to him even if it meant he lost everything. I could contest this, he said desperately. The will, the conditions. I could argue that you're being unreasonable. You could try, I agreed, but you'd lose, and you'd spend whatever money you might have left fighting a battle against a woman who's finally remembered her worth. 3 months later, I stood in the judge's chambers as our divorce was finalized. David wasn't there. He'd stopped fighting when his lawyers explained that Grandma Rose's will was ironclad and that contesting it would only cost him more money he no longer had. Mr. Patterson was there, though, with papers transferring the full inheritance to my name. As I signed document after document, I thought about the conversation I'd had with David the week before. He'd come to the house, Grandma Rose's house, which I'd moved back into ostensibly to collect the last of his belongings. But really, I think he'd come to make one final attempt to change my mind. I could have made it work, he said, standing in the living room where I'd spent so many evenings with Grandma Rose. If you'd given me more time, I could have become the husband you wanted. That's just it, I'd replied, sitting in Grandma Rose's favorite chair. I don't want you to become someone else for me, David, and I don't want to have to be someone else for you. A good marriage shouldn't require either person to fundamentally change who they are. He'd looked around the room then, taking in the antique furniture and family photos, the life I was reclaiming. Do you think she planned this? He asked. Your grandmother. Do you think she knew how it would end? I'd considered the question seriously. I think she gave us both exactly what we needed to discover who we really were. You got the chance to prove you could put my dreams first, and I got the chance to remember that I'm worth fighting for. And if I had passed the test, if I'd been the man you needed, then we'd probably still be married, I'd said honestly. But you can't fake your way through forever, David. Eventually, you would have gotten tired of pretending to be excited about my career, and I would have gotten tired of pretending not to notice. Now, as I walked out of the courthouse, A single woman with a fortune I never expected, and a future I got to design entirely for myself. I felt Grandma Rose's presence as strongly as I had that last day in her bedroom. I pulled out my phone and called the director of the Guatemala program. Dr. Martinez? It's Sarah Hamilton Well, Sarah Chen now, actually. I'm going back to my maiden name. Yes, I'm still interested in the position. In fact, I'd like to discuss expanding it. What would you say to a full-year commitment, with funding for additional volunteers? 6 months later, I stood in a small village outside Antigua, watching a family move into the home our team had helped them rebuild after devastating mudslides. The house was simple but sturdy, designed to withstand future natural disasters while respecting the local building traditions. Maria, the mother, hugged me tightly as her children ran through their new rooms, their laughter echoing off the freshly painted walls. Gracias, Sarah, she said in her limited English. You give us hope. As I watched her family celebrate this new beginning, I thought about hope and second chances, about the different ways people can be rich or poor, trapped or free. My phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Patterson. The Sarah Chen Foundation paperwork is complete. Your grandmother would be proud. I smiled, looking up at the mountains that surrounded the village. Grandma Rose had given me more than money. She'd given me the tools to remember who I was and the courage to choose that woman over the safety of settling. That night, as I sat outside my temporary housing looking up at stars brighter than any I'd ever seen, I pulled out a piece of paper and began writing. Dear Grandma Rose, I kept my promise. I remembered who I am. It turns out I'm someone who would rather build homes in Guatemala than worry about dinner parties in suburbs. Someone who finds more satisfaction in a muddy day of construction work than a lifetime of keeping the peace. Someone who believes that love should make you bigger, not smaller. Thank you for seeing that person in me even when I'd forgotten she existed. Thank you for giving me the choice to find her again. David is doing well, by the way. I heard through friends that he's dating someone new, a woman who thinks his ambition is admirable and his opinions fascinating. I hope she makes him happy. I hope he makes her happy too, without asking her to be anyone other than who she is. As for me, I'm rich in all the ways that matter. I have work that fulfills me, the means to do it properly, and the freedom to choose my own path forward. I have the memory of your love and the knowledge that I'm living a life that would make you proud. I miss you every day, but I carry you with me in every choice I make to honor the woman you raised me to be. All my love, Sarah. I folded the letter and tucked it into my journal, then looked back up at the stars. Tomorrow there would be more houses to build, more families to help, more chances to make a difference in the world. And for the first time in years, I couldn't wait to see what came next. The wind rustled through the trees around our small camp, and I could have sworn I heard the faint sound of humming an old jazz standard that reminded me of chocolate chip cookies and Sunday afternoons in a garden, learning that independence was the only inheritance that truly mattered. I was finally rich enough to understand what she meant.